Millionaire had his luxury car scratched by a beggar woman. When confronting her, he burst into tears. Marcus Blackwood adjusted his designer tie as he strode through the marble-floored lobby of London's most prestigious business complex. The autumn wind had slightly disturbed his perfectly styled dark hair, but he paid it no mind. As CEO of Blackwood Technologies, one of Britain's leading tech firms, his thoughts were occupied with the morning's board meeting. The security guard nodded respectfully as Marcus passed, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. At 38, he had achieved what most people could only dream of: a multinational company, a portfolio of revolutionary patents, and a reputation as one of the UK's most successful entrepreneurs. The lift ascended smoothly to the 20th floor, where his executive assistant, Sarah, awaited with a tablet in hand. "The board members are already gathered, sir," she informed him, falling into step beside him, and the quarterly reports exceeded projections by 15%. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Success had become routine, expected even. The boardroom fell silent as he entered, 12 pairs of eyes turning to their leader. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the London skyline behind him as he began his presentation. 2 hours later, Marcus emerged from the meeting victorious. Another successful quarter, another round of impressed shareholders. He checked his Patek Philippe watch, just enough time for lunch at his favorite Michelin-starred restaurant before his afternoon appointments. The autumn day had grown colder, and clouds gathered ominously overhead as he made his way to the underground car park. His thoughts drifted to the new sustainable technology initiative he'd announced during the meeting. The press would love it. Environmental consciousness was excellent for public relations. The distinctive silhouette of his Porsche 911 GT3 came into view, its racing yellow paint gleaming under the fluorescent lights. But something was wrong. Marcus froze mid-step, his blood running cold. An elderly woman in tattered clothes stood beside his car, deliberately dragging something metal across its pristine surface. "Stop! What do you think you're doing?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the concrete structure. His expensive shoes slapped against the floor as he ran toward the car, his heart pounding with fury. The woman didn't flinch or try to run. She stood her ground, her grey hair wild and unkempt, her clothes dirty and worn. But her eyes, there was something in her eyes that made Marcus hesitate. They were clear and intelligent, filled with a sadness that seemed to reach across the space between them. "I needed to get your attention," she said softly, her refined accent contrasting sharply with her disheveled appearance. "I've tried everything else." Marcus reached for his phone, ready to call security, when the woman pulled something from within her tattered coat. It was a photograph, old and yellowed with age. She held it out to him with trembling hands. "Do you remember Little Acorn's nursery?" she asked. Marcus's hand, still gripping his phone, began to lower as he stared at the photograph. In it, a group of small children sat in a semicircle around a young woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, his gaze fixed on one particular child, a small boy with unruly dark hair and a missing front tooth. That's me," he whispered, reaching for the photograph. The fury that had consumed him moments ago began to dissolve into confusion. He looked up at the elderly woman, really looked at her for the first time. Beyond the weathered face and threadbare clothes, he saw something familiar in her features. "Miss Thompson," he breathed, memories of warm milk, story time, and gentle hands guiding his first attempts at writing flooding back. "But how? Why?" The woman, his former nursery teacher, smiled sadly. "I've been trying to reach you for months, Marcus, through proper channels, through your office, through letters, but your walls are very high now." She gestured to the scratched car. "Sometimes walls need to be marked to be noticed." Rain began to fall outside the car park, its steady rhythm providing a soundtrack to this surreal encounter. Marcus stood frozen, the photograph in his hands, as his carefully ordered world began to tilt on its axis. The security cameras captured an unusual scene that rainy afternoon, a CEO in a bespoke suit guiding an elderly woman in tattered clothes to his private office. Sarah's eyes widened as they passed her desk, but one look from Marcus silenced any questions she might have had. Miss Thompson sank into the leather chair across from Marcus's desk, her weathered hands clutching a worn handbag. The office, with its modern art and minimalist design, seemed to dwarf her small frame. Through the window behind them, London's skyline disappeared into sheets of grey rain. "Would you like some tea?" Marcus offered, his voice softer than it had been in years. When she nodded, he prepared it himself instead of calling Sarah, something he hadn't done since his early days in business. "2 sugars, no milk," Miss Thompson said with a small smile. "You remember?" Marcus's hands stilled over the cup. He did remember. Every afternoon at Little Acorns, she had taken her tea the same way while the children napped. Sometimes, unable to sleep, he had watched her marking papers or preparing activities for the next day. "Why now?" he asked, setting the cup before her. "After all these years?" Miss Thompson took a careful sip before reaching into her bag. She withdrew a medical report, its official letterhead stark against the scratched surface of his desk. "My granddaughter, Sophie. She needs specialist surgery. The NHS waiting list is too long and private care." She trailed off, her hands trembling slightly. Marcus scanned the document, his business mind automatically calculating figures. The procedure would cost more than most people earned in several years, but why come to me? Surely there are other former students, other options. "Because you were special, Marcus," she said, reaching for the photograph again. "Do you remember this day? It was parents' evening, but your parents couldn't come. You were so upset." The memory struck him with unexpected force. He had sat alone in the reading corner, pretending to be absorbed in a picture book, while other children showed their artwork to proud parents. Miss Thompson had sat with him the entire evening, helping him create a special project, a rocket ship made from cardboard boxes that they painted together long after the other children had gone home. "You stayed late," he murmured. "You missed your evening class at university." "Yes," she smiled. "But what you don't know is that it wasn't just that evening. I was offered a position at Cambridge that year, a full scholarship to complete my doctorate in early childhood education. But your family was going through such a difficult time. Your mother was ill, your father working 2 jobs. Marcus leaned forward, his perfectly ordered world tilting further. "What are you saying?" "I declined the position," she said simply. "You needed stability, support. All my children did, but you had such potential, such brightness in you. I couldn't bear to see it dimmed." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical force. He stood abruptly, walking to the window. The rain had intensified, distorting the city beyond the glass. His reflection stared back at him, successful and polished, while behind him sat the woman who had sacrificed her dreams for his future. "There's more," Miss Thompson continued quietly. "Do you remember your first computer course, the one that led to your apprenticeship at Technical Solutions?" Marcus turned slowly. That course had been his stepping stone, the foundation upon which he had built his empire. "The community center program? But that was expensive. My parents couldn't—" He stopped, understanding dawning. "You?" "6 months of my salary," she confirmed, "but it was worth every penny. You flourished just as I knew you would." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Outside, thunder rumbled across the London sky. Marcus looked at his office, the awards, the accolades, the trappings of success, and for the first time in years they seemed hollow. Sarah's voice crackled over the intercom, reminding him of his next appointment. Marcus reached for the button, then hesitated. In his mind's eye, he saw himself at 5 years old, watching parents praise their children's artwork. He saw Miss Thompson staying late, sacrificing her evenings, her opportunities, her savings, not just for him, but for all her students. His finger moved away from the intercom. Some meetings could wait. Right now he had 20 years of catching up to do with the woman who had shaped his future in ways he never knew. That evening, Marcus found himself driving through the streets of his childhood neighborhood in East London. The Porsche seemed oddly out of place among the modest homes and corner shops. The scratches along its side caught the orange glow of street lamps, reminding him of the afternoon's extraordinary events. He had arranged everything for Sophie's surgery before leaving the office. A single phone call to the private hospital's director had secured a spot for next week. The amount required barely made a dent in his accounts, yet it had the weight of something far more significant. The Little Acorns nursery building still stood on the corner of Cedar Street, though it had been converted into a charity shop years ago. Marcus parked his car and stepped out into the cool evening air. The playground where he had spent countless hours was now a small parking area, but the old oak tree still spread its branches over the yard. Through the shop's window, He could see the space where the reading corner had been. The memory of sitting there surrounded by picture books while Miss Thompson's voice brought stories to life felt surprisingly fresh. He remembered the rocket ship they had built together, how she had helped him paint stars on its cardboard sides. A woman walking her dog slowed as she passed, staring at the incongruous sight of a man in an expensive suit standing outside the closed shop. Marcus nodded politely and continued his walk down the street. The neighborhood had changed, yet remained fundamentally the same. The Pakistani family's corner shop where he'd bought sweets was now run by their grandson. The local pub had a new sign, but the same warm light spilled from its windows. His old house was 5 blocks away. The walk gave him time to process the revelations of the day. Miss Thompson's sacrifices played through his mind: the declined Cambridge position, the computer course she had funded. How many other lives had she touched? How many other children had benefited from her quiet generosity? His phone buzzed repeatedly in his pocket. Emails, messages, his assistant trying to reach him about tomorrow's meetings. For the first time in years, he let them go unanswered. Instead, he focused on the memories flooding back: the taste of warm milk during story time, the pride when Miss Thompson hung his drawings on the wall, the comfort of her presence during his mother's illness. The sight of his childhood home stopped him in his tracks. The small terraced house had been painted a different color, and the front garden his mother had loved was now paved over for parking. But the window of his old bedroom was still there, where he had spent hours tinkering with his first computer, the one Miss Thompson's sacrifice had made possible. A group of children played football in the street, their shouts and laughter echoing between the houses. Marcus watched them, remembering similar evenings from his childhood. One boy missed a kick, sending the ball rolling toward him. Without thinking, Marcus stopped it with his foot and sent it back with a skilled touch he hadn't used in decades. "Nice one, mister," the boy called out, and for a moment Marcus saw himself at that age, full of dreams and potential, unaware of the invisible hands guiding his path. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Sarah, probably wondering why he hadn't responded to her messages about tomorrow's board meeting. The meeting where he was supposed to present the company's new cost-cutting measures. The plans sitting in his briefcase would streamline operations, increase profits, and result in significant layoffs in the community outreach department. Marcus pulled out the papers and looked at them in the glow of the street lamp. The graphs and projections were flawless, the logic impeccable. Yet standing here in the neighborhood where Miss Thompson had sacrificed everything to give him a chance, the numbers seemed to lose their meaning. He thought about the community center that had hosted his first computer course, one of many that would lose funding under the new plan. How many potential tech innovators might be waiting there, needing just one person to believe in them? How many Miss Thompsons were out there, quietly changing lives while struggling to make ends meet? The children's laughter continued behind him as he walked back to his car. By the time he reached it, Marcus had already begun drafting a different kind of proposal in his mind. The board wouldn't like it. His shareholders would question it. But for the first time in years, he felt absolutely certain about a business decision. The following morning, Blackwood Technologies' boardroom buzzed with tension. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his presentation different from the one they had expected. The scratched Porsche had made headlines in several business blogs overnight, with photographs of the CEO talking to a homeless woman spreading across social media. "Instead of cutting the community outreach budget," Marcus announced, his voice firm, "I propose we triple it. Furthermore, I want to establish a new division focused on educational technology for underfunded schools." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Winters, the CFO, was the first to speak. "Marcus, be reasonable. Our shareholders expect the streamlining we promised. This new proposal would reduce our profit margins significantly. Would it?" Marcus pulled up a new slide. "Or would it give us access to an untapped market while creating sustainable growth through community investment?" He clicked through graphs and projections he'd worked on until dawn. "We've been so focused on quarterly returns that we've missed the bigger picture." Patricia Chen, head of marketing, leaned forward with interest. "The publicity from this could be extraordinary. Corporate responsibility is a major factor for younger consumers." "But," she hesitated, "the board will need more than good publicity to approve this." Marcus had anticipated this. He pulled out his final slide, a partnership proposal with the Department of Education to develop affordable educational technology solutions. The potential contract would more than offset the initial investment in community programs. As the discussion heated up, Sarah slipped into the room and handed Marcus a note. He read it, then cleared his throat to regain attention. "Before we continue, I'd like you all to meet someone." The boardroom door opened again and Miss Thompson entered. She had traded her tattered clothes for a simple but dignified dress, though she still carried the same worn handbag. The board members watched in confusion as Marcus helped her to a seat. "This is Margaret Thompson," he announced. "She's the reason I'm standing here today, and she's not alone. There are thousands of teachers and community workers like her, changing lives without recognition or reward. I've invited her to help us understand what schools and communities really need." Miss Thompson spoke softly but with authority, years of teaching experience evident in her voice. She told them about outdated computer labs in state schools, about talented students unable to access advanced learning resources, about teachers spending their own money on basic supplies. As she spoke, Marcus noticed something surprising. Richard Winters, usually the most hard-headed of his executives, was listening intently. Later, Marcus would learn that Winters' wife was a primary school teacher, constantly frustrated by lack of resources. Patricia Chen was already typing rapidly on her tablet, her marketing mind spinning with possibilities. "We could create a mentorship program," she suggested, "connecting our tech experts with schools in disadvantaged areas." The meeting ran over by 2 hours. When it finally ended, the board had tentatively approved a pilot program, pending full financial review. It wasn't everything Marcus had proposed, but it was a start. As the board members filed out, many stopped to speak with Miss Thompson. Marcus watched as she charmed them with the same gentle warmth he remembered from his childhood. Even Richard Winters lingered, asking about specific challenges faced by inner-city schools. "You've started quite a storm," Miss Thompson said, once they were alone. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus looked out at the London skyline, thinking of his walk through his old neighborhood the night before. "I've never been more sure of anything, but I'll need your help. Sophie's surgery isn't the end of this, it's just the beginning." She reached into her bag and pulled out something that made Marcus catch his breath. It was a piece of cardboard, worn and faded, with a childish painting of stars, a fragment of the rocket ship they had built together 33 years ago. "I always knew you'd fly high," she said softly. "I just didn't expect you to take so many others with you." The news spread through social media like wildfire. A local blogger had pieced together the story of the scratched Porsche, the elderly teacher, and Blackwood Technology's sudden pivot toward educational initiatives. Within days, former pupils of Little Acorns Nursery began sharing their own stories of Miss Thompson's influence on their lives. Marcus sat in his home office on Sunday morning, scrolling through the posts. A surgeon in Manchester credited Miss Thompson for encouraging her interest in medicine. A librarian in Bristol remembered how she had taught him to read when everyone else had given up. Dozens of similar stories poured in, each one revealing another facet of Miss Thompson's quiet legacy. "You need to see this," Sarah said, walking in with her tablet. She had taken to working weekends lately, helping Marcus navigate the surge of public interest. The tablet showed a Facebook group titled Miss Thompson's Acorns, already boasting over 300 members. "They're organizing a reunion," Sarah continued. "Former students want to honor her properly. The post has gone viral in London's education community." Marcus leaned back in his chair, remembering the board meeting 3 days ago. The pilot program had been approved, but that was just the beginning. Each story he read reinforced his conviction that he was on the right path. His phone buzzed with a text from the private hospital. Sophie's surgery had been scheduled for next week. Miss Thompson had initially refused to let him pay for a private room, but had finally accepted, when he insisted it would help Sophie recover better. The reunion was scheduled for the following Saturday at a community centre near the old nursery. Marcus offered to host it at Blackwood Technology's headquarters, but the organisers insisted on keeping it in the neighbourhood where everything began. As he pulled up to the community centre that Saturday, Marcus was stunned by the turnout. The parking lot was full, with people still arriving. Inside, the hall buzzed with excitement as former students of all ages gathered, many bringing their own children. Miss Thompson sat in a comfortable chair at the centre of it all, her eyes bright with happy tears as former pupils came forward to share their memories. She remembered each one, asking about their families, recalling specific moments from their nursery days. A woman in her early 40s approached Marcus as he watched the scene. "Rebecca Chen," she introduced herself. "Class of '89. I saw your Porsche outside, still has the scratches." Marcus smiled. He'd refused to have the car repaired, much to his dealer's horror. "They're staying. A reminder of what's important." Rebecca nodded toward Miss Thompson. "She saved my family's shop, you know. My parents were struggling with English, couldn't get a business loan. She spent months helping them with paperwork, taught them enough English to manage. That shop paid for my university education. Now I run a chain of supermarkets." Similar stories circulated throughout the day. A famous theater director recalled how Miss Thompson had encouraged him to pursue drama, despite his speech impediment. A Nobel-nominated scientist spoke about the makeshift experiments she had set up in the nursery's kitchen. The local press had arrived, drawn by the gathering of successful professionals, all crediting their achievements to a humble nursery teacher. Miss Thompson tried to deflect the attention, but the stories kept coming. Then Martha Blackwood arrived, Marcus's mother. She walked slowly with a cane now, but her presence brought a fresh wave of emotion to the gathering. She made her way to Miss Thompson, and the two women embraced, sharing tears and whispered words. "She came to our house every day after school," Martha later told the gathering. "When I was ill, she would bring Marcus home, help with his homework, cook dinner sometimes. She never asked for anything in return." The atmosphere was electric with shared memories and gratitude when Victoria Sterling walked in. The former head teacher of Little Acorns stood in the doorway, her expensive suit and perfect makeup contrasting sharply with Miss Thompson's simple dress. Marcus noticed Miss Thompson stiffen slightly. Something in Victoria's smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she approached the gathering. She carried a large envelope under her arm, and there was a purpose in her stride that made Marcus instinctively uneasy. "Margaret, darling," Victoria's voice carried across the room, "how lovely to see you being celebrated. Though I must say, I'm surprised you're comfortable with all this." Attention. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Miss Thompson's hands clasped tightly in her lap as Victoria Sterling made her way through the crowd, the envelope held like a weapon. Victoria Sterling commanded attention as she moved through the community center, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. The happy buzz of conversation died down, replaced by an expectant hush. Those who remembered her from their nursery days unconsciously straightened their postures, a Pavlovian response to their former head teacher's presence. "I've been following your story in the press," Victoria continued, addressing Miss Thompson, but projecting her voice for the whole room to hear. Such a heartwarming tale, the dedicated teacher who sacrificed everything for her students. But isn't it interesting how memories can be selective? Marcus moved closer to Miss Thompson's chair, noticing how her shoulders had tensed. Martha Blackwood's hand found her friend's, squeezing it supportively. Victoria pulled several papers from her envelope. "I've kept meticulous records from my time as head teacher at Little Acorns, including some rather concerning incidents involving Margaret and her special treatment of certain students." "What are you talking about?" Marcus stepped forward, but Miss Thompson raised a hand to stop him. "Victoria has never approved of my teaching methods," she said quietly. She preferred a more structured approach. "Structure, propriety?" Victoria's laugh was sharp. "You consistently broke school policies, staying after hours with students, giving them special privileges, using school resources for personal projects." She waved the papers. "And now we find you manipulating former students for financial gain. How convenient that you chose to approach the wealthiest of your former pupils." A murmur ran through the crowd. Marcus felt his face flush with anger, but before he could speak, Rebecca Chen stepped forward. "Special privileges?" she said, her voice clear and strong. "You mean like when Miss Thompson stayed late to help my parents with their English? Did your records show that she refused payment, even when they offered?" The theater director joined in. "Or when she helped me overcome my stutter by putting on puppet shows after school? Did you write down how many hours she spent making those puppets by hand?" Victoria's perfectly composed expression wavered. "The records show..." "The records show what?" Martha Blackwood's voice cut through the tension. She stood slowly, leaning on her cane. "Do they show how Margaret visited me every day during my illness? How she made sure my son didn't fall behind in his studies? How she declined a position at Cambridge to stay with her students. Victoria's grip on her papers tightened. She was undermining the school's authority, creating inappropriate attachments. "I remember you, Mrs. Sterling," a new voice spoke up. A tall man in a police uniform stepped forward. "I was the boy who struggled with reading. You suggested I be moved to a special school. Miss Thompson fought to keep me in regular classes. She tutored me every lunch break until I caught up." More voices joined in, each with a story of Miss Thompson's dedication. Victoria Sterling's accusations withered under the avalanche of testimonials. Marcus studied the former head teacher's face, noting the mix of frustration and something else. Was it envy? He recalled Miss Thompson mentioning that Victoria had opposed her methods, but there seemed to be more to the story. Sarah, who had been quietly observing, suddenly touched his arm and showed him her tablet. She had been researching while the confrontation unfolded. The article on her screen made Marcus's eyes widen. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Sterling, these records you're so concerned about, would they be from the same period when you were removed from your position at Little Acorns? Before you were asked to resign due to financial irregularities?" The papers trembled in Victoria's hands. The composed mask cracked, revealing a glimpse of old bitterness. "That was never proven, but Miss Thompson's dedication was," Marcus interrupted gently, "every day, in small acts of kindness that changed lives. While you were building your case against her, she was building futures." Victoria Sterling looked around the room, at the faces of former students now grown successful, at their children watching with wide eyes, at Miss Thompson sitting calmly in their midst. Whatever victory she had hoped to achieve crumbled in the face of such overwhelming evidence of a life well lived. Without another word, she turned and walked out, her heels echoing in the silence. As the door closed behind her, Miss Thompson let out a long breath. "I'm so sorry," she began, but a chorus of voices cut her off. Former students surrounded her chair, sharing more memories, expressing their gratitude. The attempted sabotage had only strengthened their appreciation for their beloved teacher. Marcus watched as the community he had rediscovered rallied around the woman who had shaped so many lives. He thought about the scratches on his Porsche, Victoria's accusations, the board's initial resistance to his new initiatives. Each challenge had only served to reveal something more valuable beneath the surface. Rebecca Chen approached him again, this time with her young daughter in tow. "My Lucy starts school next term," she said. "I've been thinking about what you said at the board meeting, about educational technology. Would Blackwood Technologies be interested in a partnership with my company? I'd like to help make sure every child has a Miss Thompson in their corner." Marcus looked at Lucy, then at Miss Thompson surrounded by her former students, and smiled. "I think that's exactly what we need." The private hospital room was bright with afternoon sunlight when Marcus visited Sophie after her surgery. The 14-year-old girl sat propped up against pillows, her laptop balanced on the adjustable table. Miss Thompson dozed in a chair nearby, a half-finished cup of tea on the windowsill. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked softly, placing a gift-wrapped package beside her laptop. Sophie's eyes lit up, but she gestured for him to be quiet, pointing to her sleeping grandmother. "Much better," she whispered. "The doctor said everything went perfectly." She glanced at her laptop screen where lines of code scrolled past. "I've been keeping busy." Marcus peered at the screen with professional interest. "Is that Python?" "Yeah, I've been learning from online tutorials. There's this cool project where you can program simple robots." She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious. "Probably nothing compared to what you work with." "Actually," Marcus pulled up a chair, "we're developing something similar at Blackwood Technologies. Would you like to see?" For the next hour, they talked code and robotics, keeping their voices low as Miss Thompson slept. Sophie's understanding of programming concepts impressed Marcus. Her questions were sharp, insightful, showing an intuitive grasp of technology that reminded him of himself at her age. "You know," he said, watching her debug a particularly tricky section, "we're starting an internship program for young developers. Once you're fully recovered, perhaps you'd be interested." Sophie's fingers stilled on the keyboard. "Really? But I'm not... I'm just learning." "So was I at your age. Sometimes all you need is an opportunity." He glanced at Miss Thompson, who had taught him that lesson long ago. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Rebecca Chen entered, carrying a large basket of fruit and a tablet. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she smiled. Just wanted to check on our future tech pioneer. Since the reunion, Rebecca had become a frequent visitor. Her supermarket chain was now in talks with Blackwood Technologies about implementing educational technology in underprivileged areas, with Sophie's hospital room somehow becoming their unofficial meeting space. "Show her your robot design," Marcus encouraged Sophie, who shyly turned her laptop around. Rebecca studied the screen, her business mind clearly working. This could be perfect for our pilot program. Simple enough for primary school students to understand, but with room for complexity. Miss Thompson stirred in her chair, blinking awake. She smiled at the scene before her, her granddaughter surrounded by technology and opportunity, so different from the worried child of just weeks ago. "What's all this then?" she asked, accepting a fresh cup of tea from Rebecca. "Your granddaughter," Marcus replied, "might have just solved our interface problem for the education initiative. Look at how she's structured this code. It's intuitive, child-friendly." Sophie blushed but sat straighter, explaining her design with growing confidence. Miss Thompson watched them all, her eyes misty with pride and something else. Perhaps recognition of how life could come full circle in unexpected ways. "There's something else," Rebecca said when Sophie finished her explanation. "The Education Board representative was impressed by our proposal. They want to implement a pilot program in 10 schools across London, with potential for nationwide expansion." Marcus nodded. "Blackwood Technologies will provide the hardware and software. Your supermarkets will handle distribution and community engagement. And I can help design the teaching modules," Sophie added eagerly. "I mean, I know what kids would find interesting." The adults exchanged glances, surprised and pleased by her initiative. Miss Thompson reached for her granddaughter's hand, squeezing it gently. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when I was teaching at Little Acorns, I always dreamed of having proper resources to help every child reach their potential. Now here you all are, making it happen on a scale I never imagined." A nurse appeared to check Sophie's vitals, smiling at the impromptu business meeting happening in her patient's room. As she worked, Sophie opened the gift Marcus had brought, a small robotics kit, perfect for beginning programmers. "This is just the start," Marcus said, watching Sophie's eyes light up as she examined the components. "Every child deserves a chance to pursue their dreams, regardless of their circumstances." Rebecca pulled up some preliminary budget figures on her tablet. "The costs are significant, but with proper implementation, some things," Miss Thompson interrupted softly, "are worth more than their cost." She looked meaningfully at Marcus, who nodded, understanding completely. As the afternoon light began to fade, they continued planning. A CEO, a retail magnate, a retired teacher, and a teenage programmer, working together to transform the future of education. Outside the window, London hummed with activity. Unaware that in this quiet hospital room, a revolution in educational technology was taking shape. The Blackwood Technologies boardroom had changed in subtle ways over the past month. Children's artwork now decorated one wall, prototype interfaces for their educational software, drawn by students from their pilot schools. The scratched Porsche had become something of a corporate legend, with employees sharing their own stories of teachers who had changed their lives. But not everyone embraced the company's new direction. Marcus sat at his desk, reviewing the latest shareholder reports. A significant minority were questioning the substantial investment in educational technology, arguing that it distracted from their core business objectives. "Sir," Sarah appeared at his door, her expression concerned. "The investors from Singapore are here early, and they're not alone." Marcus looked up to see Richard Winters leading a group of serious-faced executives into his office. Among them was James Chen, Rebecca's father, now a major shareholder through his daughter's recent investment. "Marcus," Richard began, his tone carefully neutral, "we need to discuss the education initiative." The next hour was tense with carefully worded challenges and thinly veiled threats. The Singapore group had expected to invest in cutting-edge commercial technology, not social programs. They presented charts showing projected profit margins, all trending downward. "Your personal connection to this teacher is admirable," one investor said, "but sentiment has no place in business decisions of this magnitude." Marcus listened patiently, noting how Richard Winters shifted uncomfortably at these words. Finally, he stood and walked to the wall of children's drawings. "Let me show you something," he said, pulling up a presentation on the main screen. These are the latest engagement metrics from our pilot schools. The numbers told a compelling story. Student participation had skyrocketed. Early testing showed significant improvements in technical comprehension. More surprisingly, attendance rates had improved across all subjects. But the cost per student, one investor began, is offset by our new Department of Education contract, Marcus interrupted. And the partnership with Chen Supermarkets has reduced implementation costs by 40%. James Chen stepped forward, speaking for the first time. When my daughter first proposed this partnership, I had similar concerns. But I remembered something. 30 years ago, my wife and I struggled to keep our first shop open. Our teacher spent her evenings helping us understand British business regulations, teaching us English. That shop became the foundation of our supermarket chain. The room fell silent. Marcus recognized the story from the reunion. James Chen was referring to Miss Thompson. That teacher, James continued, invested in our future when no one else would. Now it's our turn to invest in others. Richard Winters cleared his throat. The preliminary data from our marketing team suggests our brand perception has improved significantly. Since launching the education initiative, younger consumers particularly respond positively to corporate social responsibility. Marcus pulled up another slide. We're not just building educational software, we're creating the next generation of tech innovators. Every child who learns to code through our program is a potential future employee, innovator, or client. He thought of Sophie, who had already improved their user interface design significantly. Her fresh perspective had solved problems that had stumped his professional developers. Furthermore, he continued, our traditional business sectors are benefiting from the innovations we're developing for education. The simplified user interfaces, the robust security protocols required for schools. These improvements are making all our products more accessible and secure. The Singapore investors exchanged glances. One of them pulled out a tablet, quickly running some calculations. The long-term potential, she said slowly, assuming even modest market penetration in the education sector, is substantial, Marcus finished. We're not just doing good, we're expanding our market in a sustainable way. The tension in the room gradually eased as more data was presented. By the time the meeting ended, even the most skeptical investors had moved from opposition to cautious support. As the group filed out, Richard Winters lingered behind. That was well handled, he said. Though I admit, I had my doubts initially. Marcus smiled. You were the one who helped me refine the financial projections. Your wife's insights into the education system were invaluable. Yes, well, Richard looked slightly embarrassed. She's quite excited about the program. Says it's the first time in her teaching career she's felt truly supported by the private sector. Through the window, Marcus could see the late afternoon sun glinting off his Porsche in the car park. The scratches caught the light, a reminder of how this all began. You know, Richard said, following his gaze, those scratches have become quite famous in the industry. Other companies are starting to look at their own community engagement programs. You might have started something bigger than you intended. Marcus thought of Miss Thompson, who had started something much bigger than she intended decades ago, one small act of kindness at a time. Sometimes, he said, the biggest changes start with a scratch on the surface. 6 months had transformed the old community center near Little Acorns into a bustling hub of technological innovation. The computer lab, funded jointly by Blackwood Technologies and Chen Supermarkets, hummed with activity as children gathered around sleek monitors, their excited chatter mixing with the tapping of keyboards. Sophie, fully recovered and flourishing in her role as junior program coordinator, moved between the workstations. Her natural ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms had made her an invaluable part of the teaching team. Today, she was helping a group of primary school students create their first simple game. Look, Mr. Blackwood, a small girl called out as Marcus entered the lab. I made the rabbit jump. Marcus walked over, smiling at the basic but functional animation on her screen. These moments had become his favorite part of the week, seeing the same excitement in these children's eyes that he'd felt when he'd first discovered programming. She's got real talent, Sophie said quietly, as they watched the girl show her classmates how to modify the rabbit's movements. Just needed access to the right tools. The lab was just the beginning. Similar centres had opened across London, each one adapting to its community's specific needs. Rebecca Chen had proven instrumental in identifying locations and coordinating with local schools, while her father's business connections helped secure additional funding. Sarah appeared at Marcus's elbow with a tablet. "The BBC is here for the interview," she reminded him. And the Education Secretary's office called again about the nationwide expansion proposal. Before Marcus could respond, he noticed a familiar figure in the doorway. Victoria Sterling stood watching the scene, her expression unreadable. Since her attempted disruption of the reunion, she had vanished from public view. Now she stood in pressed business attire, clutching a leather portfolio. "Miss Sterling," Marcus acknowledged her presence calmly. "This is unexpected." "Mr. Blackwood," she glanced around the lab, her eyes lingering on Sophie. "Might I have a moment of your time?" In the small office adjacent to the lab, Victoria Sterling seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than she had at the reunion. She opened her portfolio and withdrew a stack of papers. "These are the original proposals I rejected during my time at Little Acorns," she said without preamble. "Margaret's ideas for incorporating technology into early education. I dismissed them as impractical, too expensive." She pushed the papers across the desk. "I was wrong." Marcus examined the yellowed documents. Miss Thompson's neat handwriting outlined concepts surprisingly similar to what they were implementing now, adapted for the technology of the time, but based on the same principles of accessibility and hands-on learning. "I've been watching your program's progress," Victoria continued. "The results are impressive. I've spent 30 years in education administration, and I've never seen engagement levels like this." She hesitated, then pulled out another document. "I'm on the board of several private schools in Surrey. We'd like to discuss implementing your program. Not just the technology, the whole approach, including scholarships for students who couldn't otherwise afford private education." Through the office window, Marcus could see Sophie leading a coding workshop. The girl with the jumping rabbit animation was showing her work to Miss Thompson, who had arrived for her regular volunteer session. "Why now?" Marcus asked, turning back to Victoria. "Because I was wrong," she said simply. "About Margaret, about her methods, about everything. It took seeing all this," she gestured at the busy lab, "to understand what she was trying to achieve all those years ago." A cheer erupted from the lab as one of the students successfully completed their project. Victoria smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "You know, I resigned from Little Acorns not just because of the financial irregularities," she admitted. "I couldn't bear to see how much the children loved her when they only respected me. I thought structure and discipline were everything. I never understood that sometimes the most important lessons happen outside the curriculum." Marcus studied her for a moment. The private school's resources would certainly help expand the program's reach. "With conditions," Victoria added quickly. "Equal access for scholarship students, community involvement. Everything that makes this program work." Through the window, Miss Thompson was now sitting with a group of children, her face animated as she listened to their ideas. Some things hadn't changed. She still had the same gift for making each child feel heard and valued. "You know," Marcus said, "we're always looking for experienced educators to help shape the program's development. Someone who understands both traditional teaching methods and the need for innovation." Victoria Sterling straightened in her chair, years of defensive pride falling away. "I might know a few people who'd be interested in consulting." As they discussed possibilities, the sounds of children learning and laughing provided a constant backdrop. The girl with the jumping rabbit animation had added a fox character now, creating a simple but engaging story through code. Miss Thompson caught Marcus's eye through the window and smiled, nodding slightly as she noticed who he was meeting with. Some wounds, her expression seemed to say, could heal with time and understanding. The autumn air carried a familiar crispness as Marcus parked his Porsche outside the newly renovated Little Acorns building. The charity shop had relocated, and after extensive work, the space had been restored to its original purpose, though with some significant upgrades. Inside, the walls were lined with interactive displays and child-sized computer stations, but the reading corner remained almost exactly as Marcus remembered it. Miss Thompson's old rocking chair, carefully restored, sat surrounded by cushions and books, both digital and traditional. Today was special. 1 year had passed since the fateful encounter in the car park, and they were preparing for the official opening of the Margaret Thompson Early Learning Centre. The building would serve as both a nursery and a training facility for teachers wanting to learn their innovative teaching methods. Sophie had insisted on handling the technical setup herself, programming interactive welcome displays that responded to visitors' movements. Her grandmother's influence was evident in how she made technology accessible and engaging for even the youngest children. "The education secretary has arrived," Sarah reported, tablet in hand as always. "And there's quite a crowd gathering outside." Indeed, the street was filling with people, former students, local families, educators, and media. The scratched Porsche, now permanently displayed in a glass case in the center's entrance hall, had become a symbol of their mission, featured in educational journals and business magazines alike. Rebecca Chen was directing the catering staff, ensuring everything was perfect. Her daughter Lucy would be among the center's first pupils, along with children from diverse backgrounds across London. The scholarship program, partly funded by Victoria Sterling's private school consortium, had received overwhelming applications. "Nervous?" Miss Thompson appeared at Marcus's side. She looked elegant in a new suit, a gift from her former students, though she'd insisted on keeping her comfortable teaching shoes. "A bit," he admitted. "This is bigger than anything I imagined when I was playing with that cardboard rocket ship." She smiled, touching his arm gently. "Sometimes the biggest dreams start small. Look what you've built here, what we've all built together." The center represented everything they'd learned over the past year. The technology was state-of-the-art, but it was the human element that made it special. Every feature had been designed with input from experienced teachers, child development experts, and most importantly, the children themselves. Victoria Sterling arrived early, carrying a large package wrapped in brown paper. "Found this in storage," she explained, handing it to Miss Thompson. "Thought it belonged here." Inside was a faded poster from Little Acorn's original opening day 35 years ago. Miss Thompson's younger self smiled from the photograph, surrounded by her first class of children. Marcus spotted himself in the front row, missing front tooth and all. As they prepared to open the doors, Marcus noticed Sophie showing something to a group of teaching assistants. On her tablet was a modern version of the rocket ship game, designed to help children learn basic coding concepts. She'd kept the cardboard texture in the graphics, a subtle tribute to where it all began. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Instead of long speeches, they let the center speak for itself. Children explored the facilities while their parents watched in amazement. Teachers from across the country examined the innovative learning stations. Journalists scribbled notes about the unprecedented collaboration between business and education. Marcus found himself back in the reading corner, where Miss Thompson was showing a small group of children how to access both physical and digital books. Some things, he realized, didn't need to change. They just needed to grow. "Mr. Blackwood," a small voice interrupted his thoughts. It was the girl from the community center, the one who'd created the jumping rabbit animation. She held up a tablet proudly. "I made something for today." On the screen, a detailed animation played. A luxury car transformed into a rocket ship, carrying children up among the stars. Below, the words scrolled, "Every journey begins with a teacher who believes in you." Miss Thompson joined them, watching the animation with shining eyes. "Quite right," she said softly. "Though sometimes the teacher learns as much as the student." Through the windows, Marcus could see the autumn leaves dancing in the wind, just as they had that day a year ago. But now, instead of a solitary scratched car, the street was full of people coming together to celebrate the power of education and opportunity. A photographer asked them to gather for a picture. Marcus, Miss Thompson, Sophie, Rebecca, Victoria, and the young animation creator standing beneath the center's new sign. As the camera flashed, Marcus thought about circles closing and new ones beginning, about scratches that became symbols, and about how the smallest acts of kindness could change not just one life, but generations to come. Spring brought fresh energy to the Margaret Thompson Early Learning Centre. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes dancing above the children's workstations. In the corner office, Sophie sat with a group of international educators, explaining the philosophy behind their teaching methods. "It's not just about learning to code," she explained, her confidence having grown over the months. "It's about creating an environment where every child feels capable of achieving something extraordinary. The visitors nodded, taking notes as they watched children move seamlessly between traditional play areas and technology stations. The center had become a model for educational innovation, with delegations arriving weekly from across Europe and beyond. Marcus observed from the doorway, remembering his own journey from that scared 5-year-old to the man he'd become. The past 18 months had transformed not just his company, but the entire landscape of educational technology in Britain. "Your board meeting starts in 20 minutes, Sarah reminded him gently. They're expecting the 5-year expansion proposal. The proposal represented their most ambitious plan yet. Blackwood Technologies had partnered with the Department of Education to create a nationwide network of learning centers, each adapted to its local community's needs. The pilot programs had shown remarkable results, with participating schools reporting significant improvements in student engagement and academic performance. Rebecca Chen joined them, her daughter Lucy skipping ahead to join her friends at the Creative Technology Station. "The latest impact reports are in," she said, passing Marcus her tablet. "The numbers are even better than we projected." The data told a compelling story. Students from the program were showing improved performance not just in technology-related subjects, but across all areas of learning. More significantly, the gap between advantaged and disadvantaged students had begun to narrow. Victoria Sterling's private school consortium had played a crucial role, providing resources and support that helped expand the program's reach. The former adversary had become one of their strongest advocates, using her connections in the education sector to break down barriers and build bridges. "There's something else you should see," Rebecca said, leading them to the center's main hall. The space had been transformed into a gallery of student projects, each one showcasing the unique way children had embraced the combination of technology and creativity. In the center of the display stood a remarkable piece, a fully functional robot, built and programmed by a group of primary school students. Its design was inspired by the cardboard rocket ship from Marcus's childhood, but with modern sensors and interactive capabilities that would have seemed like science fiction 30 years ago. "They used the original rocket ship story as inspiration," Sophie explained, joining them, "but they added their own innovations. Watch this." She pressed a button, and the robot began moving, its movements guided by a sophisticated program the children had written themselves. It stopped at different points in the room, sharing educational content through a built-in projector. "The best part," Sophie continued, "is that they're already teaching younger students how to build similar projects. They've created their own little mentorship program." Marcus thought about the cycles of learning and giving back that had shaped his own life. Miss Thompson's influence hadn't just affected her immediate students, it had created a ripple effect that continued to spread through generations. Speaking of Miss Thompson, she had taken on a new role as the center's educational consultant, working reduced hours but still maintaining her gentle influence over the program's development. Her experience and insight proved invaluable as they refined their teaching methods. "Mr. Blackwood?" A small voice interrupted his thoughts. A young boy, no more than 6, stood clutching a tablet. "Can I show you my project?" Marcus knelt down to the child's level, just as Miss Thompson had done countless times with him. On the screen, a simple but clever animation depicted various professionals, teachers, doctors, scientists, all emerging from a single classroom door. "It's about how school can take you anywhere," the boy explained proudly. "Miss Thompson helped me with the idea." The simplicity and truth of the child's message struck Marcus deeply. This was what they had been working toward, not just teaching technology, but opening doors to infinite possibilities. Sarah appeared again, more insistently this time. "Sir, the board is gathering." Marcus nodded, but took a moment to praise the boy's work before heading to his car. The scratches on the Porsche's display case caught the morning light, reminding him of how this journey had begun. But now they didn't look like marks of damage. They were arrows pointing toward the future. The board meeting took an unexpected turn when Marcus announced his latest initiative. Instead of just expanding the learning centers, he proposed restructuring Blackwood Technologies itself. The company would split into 2 divisions, the commercial technology sector and a new educational technology foundation, with profits from the former supporting innovation in the latter. "What we've learned from the Margaret Thompson Center isn't just about education," he explained to the attentive board members. It's about the power of combining technological innovation with human connection. Richard Winters, who had become one of the program's strongest supporters, presented the financial projections. The commercial sector had actually grown stronger, with innovations developed for education finding profitable applications in other markets. More importantly, their corporate reputation had soared, attracting both talent and investors who shared their vision. As the meeting concluded, Marcus received a message from Sophie. The robot project had been selected for a prestigious Youth Innovation Award. The young creators would present their work at an international education conference in Cambridge, the same university that Miss Thompson had once declined for the sake of her students. The symmetry wasn't lost on Marcus. That evening, he drove to Miss Thompson's modest house, where she was hosting a small dinner celebration. The gathering included familiar faces: Rebecca and her family, Victoria Sterling, several teachers from the center, and of course Sophie, still excited from the award news. "I never imagined," Miss Thompson said as they sat in her small garden, "that helping a little boy build a cardboard rocket ship would lead to all this." The conversation flowed easily, touching on memories and future plans. Victoria Sterling, who had finally found her true calling in educational development, shared stories about the private school's transformation. Rebecca's daughter Lucy excitedly described her latest coding project, while Sophie offered gentle guidance. As the evening wore on, Marcus found himself sitting alone with Miss Thompson in a quiet corner of the garden. The sounds of friendly conversation and children's laughter drifted from the house. "You know," she said, looking at him with those same kind eyes he remembered from childhood, "success isn't measured in money or achievements. It's measured in the lives we touch, the doors we open for others." Marcus nodded, thinking of all the doors that had opened because one teacher had cared enough to look beyond the surface. "I learned that from you," he said, "though it took a few scratches to remind me." Miss Thompson smiled, reaching for a small package she had kept aside. Inside was a piece of the original cardboard rocket ship, preserved all these years. "Sometimes," she said, "we need to be reminded of where we started to see clearly where we're going." The garden lights came on automatically as evening descended, a small innovation Sophie had programmed for her grandmother's comfort. In their gentle glow, Marcus could see the perfect blend of technology and caring that had become their hallmark. Inside the house, someone had pulled up images from the center's first day. They were projected on the wall, children discovering new possibilities, teachers and parents working together, a community united by a shared vision of education. Marcus watched as Sophie explained her latest educational software design to Victoria Sterling, who listened with genuine interest. Rebecca's father discussed expansion plans with Richard Winters, while Lucy showed other children how to debug their code. In that moment, Marcus understood that the true innovation wasn't in the technology at all. It was in the connections formed, the barriers broken, the lives transformed. The scratched Porsche had been just the beginning, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable lessons come from unexpected moments of human connection. Miss Thompson squeezed his hand gently. No words were needed. They both knew that this was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, another child was building their own version of a cardboard rocket ship, dreaming of possibilities yet to come. As the evening drew to a close, the guests began to leave, each carrying with them a piece of the dream they had built together. Marcus lingered, watching as Miss Thompson hugged each person goodbye, still the nurturing teacher at heart. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. But its foundation remained as simple as it had been 30 years ago. One person believing in another, opening doors, creating opportunities. In the end, that was the greatest innovation of all.